Good morning and welcome to this special video recording in which we'll be presenting and discussing the main findings of BNamericas 2024 Oil and Gas Capex report, which is now available on our website. My name is Michael Place, and following a brief introduction and report overview, I will be joined in a panel discussion by David Casellas and João Montenegro. Investments in Latin America's oil and gas sector are on track to rise this year as an ongoing price upcycle driven largely by global geopolitical tension, offsets the combined effects of weak demand and decarbonisation. According to the latest available figures collated by BNamericas, 28 of the region's largest oil and gas operators have set aside $185 billion for their global portfolio of projects this year, compared to realised capital expenditure of $183 billion in 2023. Much of this growth is being driven by state-run operators. 7 of the largest national oil companies, excluding Venezuela's PDVSA, have budgeted $46 billion, 12% higher than the 2023 figure of $41 billion. Brazil's Petrobras is not only the biggest spending NOC, it is also the one with the largest projected year-on-year capex growth. The Rio de Janeiro-based firm has allocated $18.4 billion compared to an outlay of $12.7 billion last year, as it prioritises exploration in the northern equatorial margin and production expansion activities in the pre-salt Santos and Campos basins. It is followed by Mexico's Pemex, which has budgeted $12.7 billion, down from $13.2 in 2023, continuing a long-term trend of year-on-year investment cuts. Next is Colombia's Ecopetrol with $6.4 billion, Argentina's YPF with $5 billion, Ecuador's Petroecuador with $2.2 billion, Chile's ENAP with $700 million, and YPFB of Bolivia with $538 million. Of the international majors present in the region, ExxonMobil has the largest 2024 capital guidance with $24 billion, followed by Shell and TotalEnergies. Next are BP and Chevron, both of which have earmarked $16 billion for capital investments this year. 9 companies assessed by BNamericas for this report have multi-year plans in which they predict broadly similar annual investment to their 2024 guidance. Petrobras, for example, expects to outlay $20.4 billion a year from 2024 to 2028, while BP has an annual capex target of $16 billion from 2024 to 2030. Now we're going to be joined by David Casellas in Santiago and João Montenegro in Rio de Janeiro to discuss some of the key drivers of oil and gas capex across the region this year. Gentlemen, good morning.
Good morning, Michael. Good morning, David.
Great. So, João, we're going to start with you. We've just spoken a little about the spending plans of Petrobras. Why is the company likely to increase investment in 2024 and on such a large scale?
Well, one basic reason for that, Michael, is the fact that in 2000, Brazil's federal government changed with the election of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, and he's from the Workers' Party, who has a vision that Petrobras is a vector for the social and economic development of Brazil. So it was expected that Petrobras would be increasing investments. And this is not only in terms of upstream activities, but also downstream. And Petrobras was before trying to sell several refineries. It decided not to sell the remaining refineries that were included in its divestment program. And now Petrobras is, again, after several years, only basically focusing on exploration and production. It intends to invest in the expansion of its refining park. So, for example, Petrobras is tendering the contracting of services to expand and modernize its Abreu e Lima refinery in Pernambuco state. It is tendering the contracting of the construction works of a lubricant plant in the Gas Lube hub in Rio de Janeiro, formerly known as Comperj, just to give you 2 examples. Meanwhile, in terms of upstream, Petrobras will be exploring, is trying actually to explore the equatorial margin. It succeeded in obtaining an authorization to explore the Potiguar Basin, which is one of the 5 basins in this northern region of Brazil. But the most promising area is the Foz do Amazonas Basin off Amapá State's coast, which is neighbor basin of the Guyana Suriname basin. And this still depends on a license from IBAMA, which is our environmental regulator. It's a very controversial issue because it is somehow close to the Foz do Amazonas River basin. Even though it's 300 kilometers off the coast, it still is a concern for local environment and international environmental groups such as Greenpeace. And also there's a friction, there's a disagreement between sectors of the federal government. The Mines and Energy Ministry and President Lula himself they want the equatorial margin to be explored. Meanwhile, the Environmental Ministry, which is headed by Marina Silva, a very important person in Brazil in terms of environmental issues, they are against it. Or so it's likely to be postponed, this decision of the authorization to drill there, for after the COP, the G20, the COP UN conference that will take place in Brazil later this year. And this is a very important issue because Brazil, in 2030, Brazil is expected could see its production decline if no big discoveries, oil and gas discoveries are made. So Brazil needs, actually, this is the point of view of several experts and the government itself, to explore new frontiers. And the equatorial margin is the main most promising one. And as I said, mostly in terms of the Foz do Amazonas Basin. So yeah, this is, and besides, just to conclude, Petrobras is also investing in the resumption of fertilizer plants. So this is the case of Araucária Nitrogenados in Paraná, and it may resume also the construction of a project that had been halted due to the Lava Jato operation years ago. This is called UFN3. It's a nitrogen fertilizer plant in the center-west region of Brazil. And this is also, all of these construction works are very important for Lula because they will generate employment in Brazil, increase employment rates in Brazil, and increase investments here. And this has political dividends for the PT party. Yeah, this is basically in terms of Petrobras.
A lot on the plate of Petrobras by the sound of it. Looking beyond Petrobras, Ron, what are some of the other CapEx highlights in Brazil this year?
Yeah, I would highlight Shell and TotalEnergies, who are very important partners of Petrobras in key pre-salt projects. Both of them hold stakes in the Atapu field and Sepia fields in the pre-salt. And there was a very important, final investment decision was taken earlier this year to contract 2 new FPSOs, the P-84 and P-85, to produce in these areas. This is an example. And then TotalEnergies in turn is expected to connect in the second half of this year the Lapa Sudoeste, or southeast field, to the Caraguatatuba FPSO, which operates in the Lapa field that is operated by TotalEnergies in the Santos Basin pre-salt. This means a further increase in oil and gas output of the French company. I'm actually speaking from Rio Energy Summit now, and I was just watching a presentation by the CEO of TotalEnergies here in Brazil, and he said that TotalEnergies is eyeing to reach a production of 200,000 barrels of oil equivalent in Brazil per day in Brazil in the coming years. So this connection of the Lapa Sudoeste field is an important measure for action for TotalEnergies to achieve this goal. Another highlight is Equinor, the Norwegian company, who is moving forward with the big field Bacalhau in the Santos Basin pre-salt, also with the Raia project. These fields are scheduled to start producing in 2026 and 28, respectively. Together, just for you to have an idea of the size of these projects, they together have a total capex of $17 billion. And in terms of independent companies, one of the highlights is 3R Petroleum, which will invest $350 million in Brazil this year. 3R operates several onshore assets in the Northeast region and some offshore fields such as Peruá and Cangoá and Papa-Terra in the Southeast region of Brazil. Finally, this was not included in our CapEx report because unfortunately I only managed to speak with this company after, but we already published the story on our website. Is Prio, the formerly PetroRio, and they will invest $600 million in Brazil this year. They basically operate the Frade, Polvo, Albacora Leste, and Wahoo fields in the Campos Basin. Wahoo is planned to commence operations in the second half of the year. Those are my highlights, Michael.
Great news, João. Thanks for that insight on Brazil, not only from Petrobras, from the private sector. Always a lot happening there. Dave, it seems that Bolivia's YPFB is stepping up efforts to address what authorities say has been underinvestment in the upstream. Could you perhaps provide a little more perspective and update us on this year's production numbers?
Yeah. Hi, Mike. Thanks. Yeah, I think this will be an interesting year because there seems to have been a shift by officials and authorities to a more realistic review analysis of the country's hydrocarbon sector. In the past, most administrations maintaining an orthodox status policy towards the sector would just blame or attribute the falling production, especially of gas, to underinvestment. But now there seems to be acknowledgement that not only that there needs to be an update to the regulatory framework to promote and make the sector more attractive to not only current but potentially new investors in the sector, and also the head of state hydrocarbons company YPFB has stepped up public engagement, community outreach, and again taking a more realistic approach of what is to come. In fact, he also acknowledged recently of how this year gas production will likely fall compared to last year. And just looking at some recent numbers from the country's National Statistics Institute, the production of crude oil and natural gas in Bolivia experienced a double-digit drop compared to the first 3 months of last year. And so the hydrocarbons minister said recently, he called the current hydrocarbons regulatory law as obsolete and one that does not serve the interests of the country, and that even generates, as he said, a cross to bear in the approval of different projects. And it's also worth noting that the minister announced recently that a draft bill will be presented to lawmakers to add renewed impetus to exploration and production.
Excellent, Dave. Moving to Ecuador, I understand the bulk of investment in the country's national oil company is for exploration and production. What are some of these projects that Petroecuador has underway?
Sure, Mike. Just to put in context what you mentioned about the bulk of upstream exploration and production investment by Petroecuador, I was just looking at latest figures from the country's NOC, and nearly 100% of the investment by Petroecuador in the first 4 months of this year went to exploration and production, approximately $674 million. And it's worth noting that crude oil production has increased 6% in the first 4 months of this year to nearly 48 million barrels, and daily production has increased around 5% to 395,000 barrels of oil per day. And again, looking at Ecuador, the recent figures for daily production, for example, a few days ago, of the 485,000 barrels per day produced in the country, Petroecuador has accounted for around 80% of that production. And so the government has set a target of 550,000 barrels per day for next year. And many agree, though, that this will be a challenge, especially after the referendum last year that shuttered production at what had been considered to be Ecuador's flagship upstream project, the Block 43 near the Yasuni Park. So again, we'll see how that pans out. And I guess some of the projects to look out for in this year by Petroecuador is work that's going to be carried out or is being carried out at the Eden Yuturi, Oso Yuralpa, and Sacha assets.
Great insight there on Ecuador, Dave. Moving on to Guyana. Well, Guyana continues to boast one of the world's fastest growing E&P segments due to the series of offshore discoveries made by ExxonMobil and its partners in recent years. What's next for the country's oil and gas segment?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, well, Guyana certainly has taken the limelight as of late. And currently, its flagship project, the offshore deepwater Stabroek block, there are already 3 FPSOs producing oil and associated gas in that acreage. Another 2 are expected to come online, one next year, one in 2026, and a 6th FPSO is expected or penciled in to come online in 2027. The latter one, the final investment decision was made recently. So again, a lot of work going on there in Guyana, especially given the context of the energy transition, what many see as the closing window to monetize different oil and gas assets in the country. And I guess it's also interesting to note that ExxonMobil is advancing with its portion of the country's gas to energy project, which entails landing gas onshore from Stabroek. ExxonMobil recently announced that the offshore portion of the pipeline is around 70% complete. A similar completion milestone also is currently underway for the onshore portion. The pipeline spans 200 kilometers from Stabroek to the gas to energy project onshore. The onshore portion of the pipeline is 25 kilometers, and this gas transport duct is expected to be completed, ready for gas at the end of this year. But there has been a slight delay in the construction of the associated 300 megawatt power plant and the natural gas liquids facility, which had also been timed to be ready with the completion of the gas pipeline. But there has been news that there have been some contractual differences related to pricing with the construction company carrying out the power plant and the natural gas liquids facility. And so instead of being ready at the end of this year, the new timeline is now the middle of next year, perhaps the second half of 2025.
Great, Dave. Thank you very much for that. We'll now turn to Colombia, where state-run oil company Ecopetrol continues to play a leading role in exploration and production, despite the current government's decision to prioritise renewable energy and to lessen the country's reliance on fossil fuels. The company's plans this year are basically focused, and not only this year, but in the medium term as well, and long term for that matter, focused on natural gas, because Colombia is facing a deficit as soon as 2027, according to the Energy Ministry Planning Unit. And all focus now for Ecopetrol, and not only Ecopetrol, but private companies, is on trying to find gas for the domestic market. At the moment, especially with the recent El Nino phenomenon, the country relied heavily on LNG imports, but that import facility in Cartagena only has capacity of 400,000 cubic meters a day. So that's limited, 400,000 cubic feet a day. That's very limited, and at the moment there's talk to increase that on the Pacific coast, and also perhaps beyond LNG, increase gas imports from Venezuela by mobilizing or remobilizing a pipeline from there. But that also brings other questions into play as well about the sanctions from Venezuela and whether or not that can legally be possible in the coming years. So the other option for Colombia is offshore gas. Now, obviously that entails massive investments, not only in the upstream, but also in the midstream to bring that gas to shore. So at the moment, Ecopetrol is focused on several offshore projects, operating alone and also with Shell and Petrobras, obviously companies that have a lot of experience in offshore projects and deep water projects. And then from the private sector, the focus is from the medium and the smaller firms on smaller onshore projects. And some of these companies that are playing a leading role in these onshore projects are Parex, Frontera, and Gran Tierra, among many others. Colombia has more than 40 independent oil and gas companies operating in the country, which is one of the highest in Latin America. So let's talk briefly about Venezuela. In April, the United States reinstated sanctions targeting the country's hydrocarbon sector after President Nicolas Maduro failed to meet election commitments. Despite this, there are several loopholes allowing companies to continue operating in Venezuela. For example, special permission has been given to Chevron to continue producing oil there and exporting that oil to the United States. And the US Treasury Department has also said that new licenses could be issued on a case-by-case basis. Now, there are already several companies that have applied for those licenses since the sanctions were reinstated. Some of those include Repsol, Morel, and Prom, and also Shell. So activity is still ongoing in Venezuela despite the uncertainty. Of course, the long-term outlook hinges on next month's presidential election. The question is not only whether or not there will be a free and transparent election, but also whether Nicolas Maduro will agree to cede power in the event of an opposition victory. So that's the big unknown. Unfortunately, our time is up. So thank you, David and João, for joining us. We remind our viewers that BNamericas 2024 Oil and Gas Capex Intelligence Series report is available on our website, providing a comprehensive analysis of investment trends across Latin America and the Caribbean. It's been a pleasure to present this video. We hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much and see you soon.